But I think what Dr. Pat is trying to organise is a program where the speakers will speak one at a time so that everybody can go to every session if they wish.
That would be
That's my understanding. Yes.
Yesterday was the birthday of Mr. Patrick.
Sorry?
Yesterday was the birthday of Mr. Patrick, I think. I
Yes,
wished him. He has birthday.
Yes, he has his birthday. He had his birthday, I think maybe Monday or Tuesday this week. Yes,
Yes,
he normally has his birthday in Bangladesh.
Yes,
but
that was, I also noticed this. He will celebrate his birthday in Bangladesh.
Yeah, so this year is a bit sad. He's had to celebrate his birthday at home in Japan. I'm sure he will celebrate his birthday in Bangladesh again in the future.
Next year.
Next
hopefully.
year, we hope. All being well. Yes.
So the students are joining. So we have already about 40 students.
Yes.
So can you start the session, and by this time the students can join?
Would you like me to begin?
So what do you think? Should we wait for a few minutes?
It's up to you. I don't know how many people you are expecting, so there's no hurry on my end. So if you wish to wait a little longer, that's fine. If you want to go ahead and start, that's also fine. Up to you.
Okay, so we can wait for 5 more minutes, then we can start, I think.
Okay. We might get a few more people joining us.
Yes.
That's great.
So you have also English for academic purposes, isn't it? You have the
yes,
course
my role
English for academic purposes.
That's right. We have a program called EAP, English for Academic Purposes, and within that program there are 3 levels. We have basically the first level is an intermediate level class, then a kind of upper intermediate and more advanced class, and all of our students must complete that program before they go on to study other classes. Their other courses at this university are all in English, and so the EAP program is very important because it prepares them with academic reading skills and speaking and listening and writing skills to be able to manage their other courses in English. So my role, actually, I'm not within the EAP program this semester. Normally I teach the lower level class for reading, but I am in what we call the basic education program, which is kind of, it's an intermediate stage between the EAP program and regular content classes. And I teach one of the compulsory courses, which is academic reading across the disciplines. So my focus really is reading skills. Yes.
We have also a program like you. We have also EAP program, and there are also 3 stages: intermediate, upper intermediate, and advanced. So we are also following this, and for each level they have to complete 4 skills plus grammar and vocabulary. These 6 areas we try to cover. So I've got the similarities between your program and our program, and these 3 courses are mandatory for all the departments. This is the prerequisite. Without completing this course, they cannot actually move forward. This is mandatory for all to get the certificate, so they have to complete this. Yes.
So are your other courses also taught in English, your content classes, or are they
yes,
taught?
This is the English medium university. Yes, like we have 8 departments. So English, sociology, then law, CEC, EEE. So we have also film and media. Okay, alaikum salam. So yes, it is mandatory for all the department to participate in these four
Yes.
Courses.
Yes. Yes.
So
Your
how many
program
departments?
sounds similar.
Yes. How many departments do you have in your
At the
university?
moment, we've got two areas. Our university is a liberal arts college based on the model of an American liberal arts university, and so we've got two main fields of interest. One is global studies, which is kind of international, has an international focus, and then the other is called global business. So there's a stream which has a strong business flavour and a stream which has a more general flavour. And we've got all kinds of subjects. Students don't really major in any one particular field. Following the American system, they get more of a general education. And if they wish to specialise, they usually do that when they move on to a master's level.
Yes, we have also one of the universities in Bangladesh, that is ULEB University. They are also following this type of,
yes,
that is
yes.
liberal.
Has a more American style of education. It was kind of new to me because as a New Zealander, I grew up in a very British style system. New Zealand follows more the British university system than the American system. So in my own studies and other students from New Zealand also, when we go through university, we end up specialising in one or two fields rather than being a generalist. We're more of a specialist. Yes.
Yes. We are also used to the British system. So
yes.
Actually the.
Yes.
So Sumaya, so I think can we start now, Sumaya?
Sure, ma'am, I can start the session right now. We have almost 42 participants.
Okay.
So, dear audience, a very good afternoon to you all. I am Sumaya Afrin, lecturer, Department of English and Language Center, Green University of Bangladesh. And I will be your host for today's webinar. This program is also being live streamed on YouTube and Facebook. Dear participants and respected guests, my warm welcome to you all to this webinar on academic reading, do's and don'ts. It's a very special day for us because today we have among us Professor Cherry Brown, Akita International University, Japan, as our keynote speaker for today's session. We also have among us Director of Green University Language Center, Ms. Siraju Munira. Professor Cherry Brown lives in Japan and currently teaches at Akita International University. It is an English medium liberal arts university in the north of Japan. Professor Brown is the co-winner of the inaugural New Zealand International Excellence in Tertiary Teaching Award, and she has published TESOL resource books, online language teaching and learning resource materials, as well as a wide range of academic articles and book chapters for professional publications. She regularly presents teacher development workshops across Asia through the Teacher Helps Teachers THT organization. With THT, she has also visited Bangladesh on several occasions to provide teaching training workshops hosted by BELTA, that is the Bangladesh English Language Teachers Association. Her current project, in conjunction with BELTA members and supporters, is entitled Stories About Ourselves. This project involves working with teachers from Bangladesh to create and provide free online graded reading resources in English with a strong Bangladeshi cultural focus. Dear audience, you can leave your questions on this webinar in your Zoom chat box for the question answer session. Because there are time constraints and there might be connectivity issues, we will have a short question answer session with your questions in the chat box. Now, I would like to request our keynote speaker of today's webinar, Dr. Cherry Brown, to please deliver her talk for this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sumaya, and I'd like to say a very special thank you to you for hosting today's session, and also to Siraju Munira ma'am for organising this event. it's a great privilege for me to join you. Normally I would be in Dakar at this time of the year with the Teachers Helping Teachers organisation, but this year, of course, we cannot come. So I'm really thrilled to be able to be with you, even though it's a virtual event. And I really appreciate the fact that all of you have decided to join us this afternoon, because I realise that you've probably had a very busy day with classes and studies and other responsibilities, and it's getting towards the end of the day for you in Bangladesh. It's about 7:45 here in Japan in the evening. And it feels really nice because at this time of the day it's quite cool. So I'm quite pleased to be presenting to you at this point and not earlier in the day. But welcome to all of you, and thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. I will share my screen with you and then we will begin. So I hope that we can all see my slides here. Okay, and I'll just move that over the way. So as you can see from the first slide, we're going to be talking about academic reading skills and some do's and don'ts. And the picture below here is a picture of what my campus normally looks like when students are here. But at the moment, the students are all at home in various parts of Japan and also some abroad. We have international students. So my campus, if you can imagine this photograph with no students in it, that's what it looks like at the moment. So I'm feeling a bit sad that my students are not here, but I'm grateful that we can still study online. And I'm teaching this semester and last semester a course called Academic Reading Across the Disciplines. And so what I have to share with you today is a little background to what I'm going to talk about. And basically I will divide my talk into two sections because I realize that some of you are students and some of you are teachers. So I've got tips or suggestions for both groups of people. So a little bit of background, as I said, I'm teaching academic reading skills across the disciplines, and my job in that role is to prepare students to deal with other courses, other content courses in English, where they will have to read often quite difficult, challenging academic material. And so my job is to try and help build their confidence and give them the skills and the strategies and some knowledge about how to go about reading difficult academic, native speaker level academic material. So I'm going to cover some do's and don'ts for students, but also some tips for teachers who are teaching these kinds of courses. And of course, we'll have time for questions and answers closer to the end of my talk. So to begin with, I've swapped the concept of do's and don'ts into don'ts and do's, because I really would like you to think about things that you shouldn't do or you shouldn't forget to do, okay? So the first thing I would like to talk about is things that you should not fail to be aware of, so things that you should be thinking about. And when we are reading academic material, one of the first things we should think about is why. Why did the writer write this text that I have to read? What was the purpose of the writer? Was the writer writing to persuade me or to inform me or perhaps to entertain me? Okay, if we know why a writer has written something, it will help us to understand how to approach it. Okay, so that's one why. Another why is think about why you have to read it if you're a student. Do you have to read it for a test? Do you have to read the material to help you prepare an assignment or take part in a class discussion? Or are you just looking for background information to help you with something else? So keep these things in mind, and that will help you decide how much time and attention to give to what you have to read. You don't have to read everything in the same way. So the next thing to be aware of is what kind of text is it that you're reading? Is it a report? Is it an essay? Is it a novel if you're taking a literature class for everything, for instance? So as I said before, don't read everything in the same way. Some things need more attention than others. Think about who is the writer? Is the writer an expert in the field? Do they have the background, experience and qualifications to write in this field? Can you trust what they are writing? Do other writers refer to this writer often? Okay, so who is the writer? And finally, a good question, how much time and attention should I give to this piece of reading I have to do? Some things I have to read in great detail, and some things I can read quickly because I'm just looking for specific or particular pieces of information. So these are a few things to be aware of when you begin reading. Why, what, who, and how. Okay, my second point, don't forget to prepare to read before you begin reading. Okay, many people think that all they have to do is read something once and that's enough. Unfortunately, for academic reading, that's not the case. You do often need to read something 2 or 3 or sometimes more times than that. So before you begin reading, you should try to get as much information as you can to help you understand what might be coming. So don't forget to preview what you're reading first. So when you're previewing, you're spending 2 or 3 minutes looking for general information to help you understand what you're going to read. So notice the title, see if there are any smaller subheadings. Think about how the text is organized, okay? What comes first, what's in the middle, what's at the end. Are there any pictures and do they have information with them? So illustrations and captions. Is there other graphic material like tables and charts, and why is it there and what is it? Okay, so scan everything, look at everything first, and that might help you learn something about the text before you actually begin to read. So what I'm trying to encourage you to do as a student is don't think of reading as a goal, okay? It's not just my goal to finish reading this, but think of reading as a process, and you're going to go through several steps in order to go through this process. And I like to use this graphic here to show you that really there's 3 stages to reading: what you do before you read, what you do while you read, and what you do after you read. So pre, during, and post reading. So think of reading as a process like that. So the first time you read something, read the whole thing first without stopping. Don't spend too long thinking about anything you don't understand. Just read through and try and cover everything and make sure you've got a very general idea of what it is all about. And then when you've done that, go back and read it again more closely. And the second time you read, that's when you should start making notes. Okay, and you can read it a 3rd or even a 4th time. So prepare to read and think of reading as a process. The next point I'd like to make is do not be a passive reader. Okay, a passive reader is a little like a sponge and they expect to be filled up with information. However, a good reader is a very active reader. and their brain is really working hard, just like this guy here on the exercycle. And they're thinking, you know, I've got to use it or lose it. If I don't really engage my brain and think deeply about what I'm reading, there's no point in reading, really, and I'll forget what I read. So some suggestions for being an active reader, a few strategies. Visualize, try and imagine what the writer is describing in your mind. Create pictures in your mind. Clarify anything that you're not sure of. Try and find out what it means. Ask yourself a lot of questions about what you're reading, and try and predict what's going to come next and make connections between ideas as you're reading. And then finally, come to some point of view about it. Make an opinion, evaluate it. Do you agree with it? Do you find it useful or helpful or not? Okay, so some of those things will help you be an active reader. Something else you can do to be an active reader is, and you can see where my cursor is going around here, annotate the text, make notes on the text. Of course, you can't do that if it's a library book, but if you have a print copy of something, you can make notes directly on the text, and that's a very good thing to do as you're reading. What should you annotate? Of course, you should highlight any key ideas, okay, main ideas. Each paragraph usually has one main idea or sometimes a couple of main ideas. Any important terms that the writer is using that are necessary for you to know in order to understand the topic. And also make sure that you annotate effectively by having some kind of a system, okay? Doing all of this will help you to understand more easily. Most importantly, around the edge of your reading, in the white space, in the margins, you should put some questions and some personal comments. So questions would be things like, what does the writer mean by this? Or why does the writer say this, for example? Or I really don't understand this. What is this all about? Okay, so put a question there to remind you to find out what you need to know. And the last thing here, personal comments, is really important. As you're reading, ideas will come into your mind and you will make connections. You will think about experiences you have had that relate to what you're reading. You might think about conversations you have had, or a movie you've seen, or a book you have read, or some other article that you have read. And you should try and write down what you think, give your opinion, put all of that into your notes. And these last two things, questions and personal comments, really are useful for helping you get ideas for your essays, your assignments, your presentations, and so on. So here's what I use with my students. Okay, this is what I call an annotation key. And I give my students this, and if you are interested in this, I suggest you take a photo of it or a screenshot of it, just so that you've got some way to remember. Okay, so what I'm asking my students to do is I give them this online, and they can delete the red writing and they can put their own information into this. And this is like a key, like a map, to help them and me understand what their note-taking symbols and colors and shapes and so on mean. So as I said before, I like them to use highlighter pens of 3 different colors, one for main ideas, one for key terms, and one for supporting ideas or key arguments. So 3 highlighter colors. Then personal opinions or comments, and often students will put that into some kind of shape, like a cloud or a circle. Questions, and they need to say how they identify those. Unknown words, I ask my students to underline or circle these, not to highlight them, so that they do not confuse these words with the key terms used by the author. Okay, so a pen or a pencil is useful for this one. Next to those words, they should put the meanings of those words. Okay, if there's no space, I ask them to write them in a list and number them in the reading text and number them in the list. And then I can check that they have understood the meanings of those words. I ask them to use different symbols, things like stars or question marks even. Different types of lines and different shapes and anything else that they like to use to help them remember different kinds of information. Okay, so they've got all of these methods.
হ্যালো হ্যালো
ম্যাম শুনতে পাচ্ছেন?
হ্যাঁ, চেরি ব্রাউন কি আনমিউট হয়ে গেল?
ম্যাম খুব সম্ভবত ডিসকানেক্ট হয়ে গিয়েছেন।
আচ্ছা, দেখো তো দেখা যাচ্ছে কিনা। ওনাকে পোস্ট করেছো না?
জি ম্যাম, আপাতত ডিসকানেক্টেড আছেন।
এখন আমার জয়েন করবেন, কানেক্টিভিটি প্রবলেম আছে। স্টুডেন্টের জন্য বলছি তোমাদের অ্যাটেন্ডেন্সটা একটু পরে কাউন্ট করা হবে, ঠিক আছে? আমি শীটটা দিয়ে দিব, এখানে অ্যাটেন্ডেন্স লেখার দরকার নেই। তোমরা কেউ লিভ করো না, ঠিক আছে? আর স্ক্রিনশটটা নিয়ে সুমাইয়া, তুমি কি স্ক্রিনশট নিতে পারি? চলে এসেছে। Yes, so you have to unmute yourself, Ms. Cherry Brown.
I think I lost you. So at what point did I lose you? Because I might go back. What was I talking about when you lost me? Can you remember which slide I was discussing?
There was a chart.
Okay. And the chart was to do with annotating?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so thank you. Okay, so I'll go back to that slide, and apologies if
no problem.
If I repeat anything that I said before, because I'm not quite sure when I lost contact with you.
Okay, no problem. So you have to share your screen, I think. The screen is not
I will share my screen again. Just a moment. I think what I'll do is I'll just share the screen like this, and then if I lose you, I'll be able to see that I've lost you. Okay.
Sure.
So the image
you are in this slide. Yes.
Yes, the image will be a little smaller for you, but I hope that's okay. So as I was saying before, annotating, it's important to use a range of different techniques or different methods. So as I said before, key ideas, I would use highlighter pens for key ideas, key terms, and key arguments or supporting ideas, key arguments and supporting ideas being the same thing. Use a pen or a pencil for writing personal opinions and questions and comments around the outside. For unknown words, I would use a pencil or a pen again, and I would usually circle those, not highlight, because highlighting, if you highlight the words you don't know, you might mix them up with the key terms used by an author. Okay, so I tell my students use a different method for that and put the meanings beside them. And then think of different symbols or shapes you can use for different purposes. Maybe you want to put quotations in a rectangle like that, for example. If you are wanting to use symbols, here are some examples of symbols that you could use. Things for predicting, things for confirming what you predicted, question marks, of course, for questions, stars for something that's interesting, an exclamation mark for something important, and so on. So these are nice examples. If you like this, if you think this is useful, take a screenshot of it or take a photograph of it. Okay. Normally I ask my students to use this as a template and to delete the red writing and put their own information in here. They have to submit this to me along with the annotations that they do so that I can check what they're doing as they are reading. Okay, so let's go to this. Why bother? Why bother annotating a reading text in detail like this? Well, there are some really good reasons why it's a good idea to annotate in detail. One is that you'll be able to find important information quickly because you will know what the different colors and shapes and symbols stand for, and you will be able to locate that information in the reading text very quickly. You will also be able to organize that information in your own mind, and your comments and questions, as I said before, will give you ideas for other assignments. If you annotate, you can focus on the information you need to know without having to read a whole reading text again, okay? So you can just find the bits and pieces that you need. And my students, I get them to give me feedback at the end of each semester and to tell me what they think about the different tasks and activities that I give them. And I ask them about annotation. And generally, my students always say this is one of the most helpful skills they have learned that has helped to develop their reading skills. So some of the comments that my students have made, they've said, annotation is the key to reading easily. I want to use this skill in my other classes. That was from my student Kotaro. Another student, Terue, said the annotation skill she learned helped her a lot, especially when she wanted to know what her own opinions were. Okay, so making comments and asking questions helped her to think about what her own opinion was. And the annotation rubric, or the standards that I used to evaluate were very specific, and they helped her to really interact and communicate with the ideas in the text in depth. And she said that helped her to go further beyond where she usually stops when she reads. So she learned to read in greater depth and detail. And Misuzu said that the annotation skills really helped her a lot, and without them, she couldn't organize her opinions or the key points which she found. So she used this annotation skills in her other classes, and she found it also helped her with writing summaries of information when she had to use that information elsewhere. Okay, moving on to another point now. I've spent a lot of time talking about annotation. Let's think about vocabulary now. And it's very important that you shouldn't just ignore words that you don't know. Do find out what they mean, but be very careful that you don't spend time learning the wrong vocabulary. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, what should you do when you meet a word you don't know? And I suggest to my students that they circle that word and just keep reading. They can come back later and check the meaning of it later and write the meaning beside the word later. After that, they should be thinking, do I really need to learn this word, or is it not important? How important is this word? And I tell my students to focus on learning words that are called high frequency words, or very common English words. Words that are commonly used in everyday life, and words that are commonly used in academic writing and academic lectures. Those words are the words that you really need to know, okay? And I'll show you where you can find those in just a moment. Key terms used in each subject discipline, you don't really need to spend a lot of time learning those. You can create your own list and refer to that, make your own little dictionary. You will learn them as you meet them. But you need to focus on high frequency words, common words. So here are some links to these two lists that I'm going to talk about now. Two lists. One is called the GSL, or the General Service List, and the other is called the AWL, the Academic Word List. And again, I suggest that you photograph or screenshot this information so that you can visit these websites and look at these lists of words. Okay, so the first link there will take you to the General Service Word List, and it will tell you the most common words in English. And the second one, the Academic Word List, is about 600 words that you must know in order to succeed at university. And this one is the most important one for you as university students. I would strongly recommend that you look at that list of words there. The next point I want to make is that it's important to be organized, not like this guy, okay? It's important to keep your records in an organized file, your reading texts, your vocabulary notes, any notes that you have made, other supporting material, worksheets, etc. So keep them in a file and keep them well organized. You don't want to waste time looking for stuff because you haven't organized it well. And I've just given some suggestions of ways that you can organize your notes there. Something else that's important to do as you're making notes is to make a reference of everything that you read. If you're reading academic material, you often have to quote it or refer to it in assignments. You might need to put a quotation and put the name of the book and the name of the author, or the name of the journal and the name of the writer and the date and who published it and all of that information. So I always say, every time you make notes from something, always write down what you are reading and where it comes from and who wrote it. Make sure you put a proper reference at the top of your notes for everything that you are reading. And whatever style you have to use for essays and reports, try and practice using that style. And the more you use it, the more automatic it will become and the easier it will become. And later, it means you don't have to waste time looking for that information because you already have it. Okay, so making your bibliography at the end of your assignment will be really easy because you will already have the reference ready to go. Okay, the other thing I'd like to talk about is homework. I'm kind of jumping around a lot. There's no real order of priority to what I'm telling you. These are just random things that I have found are important for my students. And one thing I notice is that many students are very busy, and so they often put off doing their reading until the last minute. And unfortunately, that's not good for developing good reading skills. So I always recommend that my students do make a weekly study timetable and plan ahead. When do they have to complete their reading by, and make sure that they have a schedule that they can follow. And don't forget to put time in there for other things. You're not a machine, so you know it's not just study, study, study 7 days a week, all day, all night. You should have balance, so make sure you put other things in there. And especially important is to include review time, okay? Don't just be constantly looking at new material. Make sure you go back and review and have time to review. Okay, after you have read something, you need to be able to check your understanding of what you have read. And I'm going to show you a little chart that I use with my students that helps them decide whether or not they really understood something that they read. Okay, so the chart will come in just a moment. Something else you can do is to discuss your understanding with another student or some other person who has read it. And that will help you to check, yes, I understood it, or no, I didn't understand it. But it also helps to give you a bigger perspective or a bigger picture and some new ideas that you hadn't thought of, which will be very useful. And remember, there's often more than one way to understand and interpret the ideas in a reading text. So be open to different points of view and different ways of understanding something. That will help to build your understanding as well. Okay, so I said I'm going to show you a chart called negative and positive comprehension signals. This little chart is a very useful thing to help you check. And again, you can take a screenshot or a photograph of this. Okay, it comes from a book by McWhorter and Sember, and it's a very useful little chart. So on the left here, we have what we call positive signals, and on the right, negative signals. And we can use these to help us decide if we understand what we are reading. So if we say yes to something, if we say yes mostly to the positive signals, then we probably do understand the material. However, if we say yes to most of the negative signals, we will be saying, oh, I don't really understand it. Okay, so let's just look at the positive signals. Do you feel comfortable and do you feel you have some knowledge of the topic? Yes. Do you recognize most of the words or can you figure them out from context? Yes. Can you express the main ideas in your own words? Yes. Can you understand why your teachers asked you to read this? Do you know why it was assigned? Not sure, okay. Can you read at a regular and comfortable pace? Can you make connections between ideas? Can you see where the author is leading? You understand what is important. So if you say yes to most of those things, you can say, I think I understand. These negative signals are just basically the opposite. Okay, so if you say yes to these ones, you're basically saying, I don't understand. The words are not familiar, the topic's not familiar, I have to read it again and again, I'm slow when I read, I can't see where the writer's going, nothing seems important or everything seems important, and I can't figure out what the writer's trying to aim at. Okay, so if you say yes to those, then you're not really understanding what you are reading. So this is very useful to help you decide whether you need to spend more time on something or you can move on to something else. Okay, another thing you can do is have a system for reading something new. And I like to tell my students about the SQ3R system. SQ3R. S means to survey or preview, which we have talked about already. Look at something and try and work out what it's about. Ask ourselves some questions. What do I want to learn from this? What do I already know? And then read. Okay, so the number 1 and 2, you should spend about 3 or 4 minutes doing that. And number 3, read more than once if you need to. Now, number 4 sounds a bit weird. My students always look surprised when I tell them that they should walk around the house and retell the information out loud to themselves or to someone else who's willing to listen. And doing this, speaking aloud, helps you to put the information into your own words. Retell the information in your own words. This will help you check whether you understand and remember everything. Then go back and review the text Again, did you miss something out when you were retelling or reciting it? Okay. And that will help you again to fix the information in your mind. Next, don't forget to make connections. Now, reading and writing are not really all that separate. They're often very closely connected. So when you're reading something, you should be thinking, how well is this written? What makes it a good piece of writing? How well is it organized? How are the ideas connected? What kind of language is being used? And why did the writer use this kind of language and organization? And if you think it's really well written, maybe you can use that reading text as a model for your own writing work, right? So get ideas from good pieces of writing to help you create your own writing. So that's one connection you can make. Another connection is to think about the ideas and information in each reading text and connect that information with other things you know, with other subject areas that you're studying, with other courses that you're learning. Human knowledge is connected, is interrelated. So as we say, connect the dots, try and find ways in which the information can be useful in other areas that you know about. And finally, don't forget to use the information from your reading in a realistic or practical way. Ask yourself, how does this information relate to my life? Okay, how can I use it in my life? How can it be useful in the life of my society, my community, and in the wider world? Why is it useful to have this information? And how can I apply these ideas? There's no point in just reading something and forgetting about it. We need to put information to work for us. And finally, after you've done all of these things, don't wear yourself out, okay? I always say to my students, it's really important to have good quality sleep. Research tells us that when you sleep well, information in your short-term memory goes to another part of your brain and it is stored in your long-term memory. And if you don't sleep well, you will not remember and keep learning things and have them stay in your brain. So I say to my students, sure, read every day, but don't stay up too late. Get some rest. Okay, so those were some tips for students. I'm going to move on now and talk about some suggestions for teachers. And the first thing I like to say to teachers is when you're teaching, don't do all the work. Okay, make your students do the work. Don't let them be like these guys, okay? And you might be thinking, well, how can I make my students do the work? Well, here are some suggestions for having a more student-centered and a more busy classroom. And I like to suggest that my colleagues flip their classrooms. And what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean by that is that the students do the reading and get the input before they come to class. Okay, and I often get my students to watch YouTube videos or other videos and then come to class and discuss those. So I'm not spending a lot of time in class actually reading. That happens outside class time. And I organize my students into groups and I give them an activity which I call a GLD or a GLDA. And that just means Group Leader Discussion Activity. And each student takes turns to lead a small group discussion. And the process for that is as follows. First of all, everyone in the class has to read a particular reading text. Then the people who are going to be group leaders in the discussion in the next class, they have to prepare a handout. And in their handout, they have to write a summary of the text. They have to find some outside information and include that in their handout. And that should relate to the reading in some way. They should not just cut and paste it from the internet. It should be in their own words. They need to add a picture, they need to give references, and they need to create some comprehension questions and some critical thinking questions. So all of that goes into a handout. When they come to class, they share that handout with each other. And because we're learning online, I'm using Google Docs to do that at the moment. And my students work in breakout rooms online, and they look at each other's Google Doc, and they can give feedback directly on the Google Doc. Okay, so the group leaders will share their summary, get some feedback, and share their outside information, and then lead the discussion. And this all takes maybe about 40 minutes in total. So I just join in, I listen, I go from group to group, I watch what they're doing. If they have questions, I will answer their questions. I may ask some questions or suggest something. But on the whole, my students manage those discussions themselves. And then at the end of the discussion, we might have a short general classroom discussion. The leaders might report back, and we might follow it up with another activity or a homework assignment. And then after the class, the group leaders rewrite their summary, and they submit that and their handout for assessment. And then I give them their overall grade. So here is some students I was working with in Vietnam involved in this kind of activity. In the handout, remember I said I want them to make comprehension and critical thinking questions. Let's think about those questions first of all. Comprehension questions should check two things. A, do the students actually understand the material? And B, can they remember important information from the material? So I have to sometimes give them examples and help them practice making these kinds of questions in class first, so that the leaders know how to make good questions. With the critical thinking questions, I like to use Bloom's taxonomy of higher order thinking skills. So I would start with applying and go up to creating. Okay, so applying questions. Questions would ask, how does this material relate to real life? Analyzing questions ask students to compare and contrast, or look at each part or element of an argument, or the relationships between ideas. Evaluation questions would ask students to give their opinions about the value or the worth of an idea. And then creating type questions would ask students to make suggestions and solve problems. How would they solve a problem? What would they do? And again, I would provide some model questions to help them learn how to do that. To make those kinds of questions, I often use this. It's called the blooming orange. And if you look around the outside, you can see remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, create. This is Bloom's taxonomy again. Inside each part of the orange, there are some verbs. And we can use these verbs to start our questions, okay? Name, if I want a remembering question, it might be something like, name the planets in the solar system, okay? Or describe how to make whatever was made in the reading text. Okay, so you can see these verbs are useful, and again, you can take a photo of that, or you can find it online actually. Okay, and they can help you make really good critical thinking and comprehension questions. And students get very skilled at making these kinds of questions when we show them how to do that. Another thing that's important, I think, is to focus on vocabulary instruction in a reading class. Laufer, who's a scholar who specialises in vocabulary learning, her findings indicate that vocabulary learning is actually the key to language acquisition. We cannot progress in our knowledge of a language if our vocabulary knowledge is poor. Even if we have strong grammar, if we don't have enough words, we can't communicate and understand anything. And Paul Nation, another vocabulary expert, tells us that about 25% of our learning time should be devoted to vocabulary learning. That's how important it is. And the methods and activities are not as important as making sure that our students meet the words they need often. So frequency of exposure, meeting those words often. Learning the right words, coming back again to high frequency words that I showed you before. And creating activities that require deeper processing, not just matching meanings and words, not just filling in gaps, but activities that require students to use the words in a real stretch of language, in a meaningful context, with their own original sentences or paragraphs if they are writing. The other thing that we need to think about is that we need to be very careful about the textbooks that we use. And textbooks are not always that helpful when it comes to learning high frequency vocabulary. So we may need to just compare the vocabulary in our textbooks with the vocabulary on the high frequency word lists. Most English language textbooks are not very good at doing this. I've done research into this, and we've discovered that many books don't actually present the right vocabulary for learners at the right level. So it's really important for teachers to be aware of the high frequency word lists and make sure that learners are studying the right words and that they have lots of opportunities to meet those words. So go beyond the textbook where you need to and use material from a variety of sources, especially materials that you have made yourself. And always when you're using a textbook, ask yourself, does it really meet my students' needs and my learning goals? Okay, don't be afraid to experiment and think about what worked and what didn't work. Okay, moving on. In academic reading, we are often focusing on intensive reading, okay, reading in depth, but that's not all there is to do. We should also think about reading for pleasure, and I know that Dr. Mark Bartholomew spoke about this in his talk. It's very important that we and our students have a habit of reading for pleasure. And X-Reading online provides a lot of graded pleasure reading material. And I ask my students to keep a reading log, and we have regular classroom discussions about the things that they have read. Now, often this material is written in places like the United Kingdom or the United States. And sometimes the concepts and the content is a bit foreign. So recently I have been working with Bangladeshi teachers trying to create materials that are really more useful in Bangladesh with Bangladeshi learners. So yes, students are learning a foreign language, English, but there's no reason why they should only read about foreign cultures and ideas and so on. So I aim to work with teachers to provide English language materials that have a local flavour, a Bangladeshi cultural focus. And we found that students using this material are often much more motivated because they can see something of themselves in the material and they're more willing to take part in class. So if you're interested, you can go to our website. It's called Stories About Ourselves. And the way that you can get to it is to go to the Belter website and then just hit this button here, which is a portal, and it will take you to our website. And here's an example of some of the stories that we have on our website. And you can see that they reflect events and activities and people within Bangladesh. Okay, so there's a direct link there for people who are interested. This is all free material. I don't get any money for it. Nobody gets any money for it. We do it because we want people to have Bangladeshi materials, free materials and graded materials. So that's all there and it's free to use, and you can just go and access it as you wish. And the last thing I'd like to say to teachers is don't fail to be a good reading role model yourself. As we say in English, practice what you preach. In other words, if you have a strong love of reading and if you have good reading habits yourself, you can use that to encourage your students to enjoy reading as well. So demonstrate your enjoyment of reading with your students and share with them what you are reading from time to time. You can bring books or refer to blogs and articles and say why they are meaningful to you. Okay, so that's pretty much all that I wanted to say to you today. I have a few references here if people are interested. And then finally, I'll just show you a photograph of our lovely library. This is designed to look like a Japanese umbrella. And it's a beautiful building. And then again, this is my campus in the springtime. And it looks a bit like that now, but without all the blossoms, because there are no students. And we wish they were here, but unfortunately not. So that's all I have to share with you today. So I'm very happy now to come back to the main screen, and if people have questions or comments, please feel free to ask me what you would like to know.
Thank you so much, Professor Brown. It was such a lively, informative session by our dear Professor Cherry Brown. So we have some questions from our students that I'd like to volunteer for you. And shall I start?
Yes, please.
Okay, so the first question we have received from our students is, how can we know the purpose of the writer before reading?
You have to check things like the title. What's the title? What information does the title give you? But if you're reading academic material, often there is something at the beginning of an article what the writer is aiming to achieve. So that's one thing you can look at if you're looking at academic articles, journal articles. Another question is just to start reading and ask yourself, is it one of three things? Is the writer trying to persuade me of something? Okay, so is the writer presenting a point of view? If that's the case, they're trying to persuade me. Is the writer just giving me information? Okay, is this just describing something, giving me facts and statistics? Or thirdly, is the writer trying to entertain me, okay, in some way, either to make me happy or to affect my emotions? And not much academic reading material is designed for entertaining purposes. Most is to persuade or to inform. If that is clear in your mind, then you know how to approach the material. So if you can see that the writer's really trying to persuade you, you know that you have to be careful and think, do I agree or not? If the writer's giving you information, you need to think, where can I check this? Okay, so think about those three purposes. It's quite general, but that will help you get on the right track as far as working out the purpose of the writer is concerned.
Okay, thank you, Professor Brown. The next question is, which things can help us to judge the illustrations, headlines, and other things in the time of previewing?
To judge them? I think at that point, what you're doing is you're not trying to judge them at that point. When you're previewing, you're just trying to find out what kind of information can I get about the reading from these things. Okay, so previewing is, the purpose of previewing is to try and gather information. What is the reading text about? And what can I learn about it before I start reading in detail? When you start reading in detail and you come to a chart or a table, that's when you need to think, can I trust this material? Is it believable? Is it accurate? And so on. So that comes with detailed reading rather than previewing.
Thank you so much. And the next question is, whenever I encounter an unknown word, I immediately head to learn to the meaning to keep me synced with the context. Sometimes it is just a matter of double click on that word. Is it still bad to do so?
I think the first time you read something, if you don't understand it, I wouldn't stop. I would just circle it so that you can find it and just keep reading. Often if you keep reading, the context will clarify the meaning of that word for you. And if it doesn't, you can go back later. So you have, by putting a circle around it, that will help you to remember, I've got to go back and check that. The problem is if you stop and check every word in detail as you read, it slows you down. And also research shows us that people forget what went before and they get lost because they're so focused on the meaning of the word, they have forgotten the meaning of the whole paragraph or what the writer has said before. So I strongly recommend that the first time you read something, just circle the word and then go back and spend time finding the meanings and writing the meanings beside the words, and then go back and read it again. And if you forget the meaning, it's there. Okay, you can check it again. But the first time you read, I certainly would read very quickly and very generally and try and get a whole picture, because often you will discover and learn things about words as you continue. So don't stop, don't get bogged down by words that you don't know the first time you read them.
Thank you. The next question is, while reading a foreign hardcover novel, too many unknown words are there. What would be the best strategy to learn the meaning of those words immediately or later by marking them?
I have the feeling that the student or the person who is asking this may be studying difficult novels and literature in an English literature class. And I sympathize with you because that material is very difficult, and I do understand that it's challenging. There's no magic pill that I can give you. Vocabulary learning is a long, slow process. And the important thing to do is to learn the most common words in English first. Don't waste time trying to learn difficult words that you will hardly ever meet again in the future. You learn the words that will help you improve your overall knowledge of English. But again, if you're reading literature and reading novels, I would do the same thing as when reading an academic reading text. Read as much as you can the first time. Maybe a novel's pretty long, so I would just like read a whole chapter and then go back, and again, each time you meet a word you don't know, circle the word or list the word somewhere if you're not able to write on the book, and find the meaning the second time you go through. But the first time, try and read as much as you can. The big problem is that studies tell us if you don't understand around 97% of the words around a word you don't know, it's very difficult to guess from context. So I would suggest try guessing from the context, but don't panic if you can't. You can always check a dictionary later. There's nothing wrong with doing that.
Okay, thank you, Professor. The next question is, at least how many times should we read one text?
It depends on what the text is, on how long it is, on what you have to do with it, and what your purpose is in reading. So, for example, if you have to write an essay in which you are criticizing the argument of an author of an academic article, then you have to understand that article in great detail. If you're just looking for general information from, for example, a blog on the internet, you wouldn't have to spend a lot of time reading and rereading and rereading. You just look for the information that you need, right? So think about what it is you're reading and why you're reading it and how much time you need to give to it. And it will be different for different things. Think about the things you read in your own language. Okay, do you give the same amount of attention to everything? Do you read a news story with as much attention as you pay to a novel or to an advertisement for toothpaste? Okay, so different types of reading texts require different amounts of attention. You have to make the decision about how much time to spend based on what you have to do. If it's something important, then you will give it more time. If it's something less important, you will give it less time.
Thank you, Professor. The next question, which is, can you suggest some readings for the beginners?
Readings for beginners. Beginner learners of English really need to learn the most common words in the English language. So I strongly recommend graded readers. So go to that site, X Reading, and find simple stories that are of interest to you. Choose things that are interesting and fun to read and pleasurable to read, and read things that are very, very easy. So graded reading texts are really important for beginning learners, and all of my level 1 students have to read graded readers. And that's one reason why I created the Stories About Ourselves website, because I was very aware that there wasn't a lot of material available in Bangladesh for different levels of readers who could read about things that were familiar to them. So you could look at some of the material. It's still a new website, so we don't have a lot of material there, but there is some material there for lower level learners, all the way up to people who are more advanced. So I do strongly recommend X Reading, or various publishing houses like Penguin and Longman and Pearson and so on. They put out graded readers. There's a lot of graded reading material online that is free, so do a search for that as well. But it's very important that I think low-level beginning learners read things that are interesting to them and that they are exposed to the most common words in English from the General Service word list.
Thank you, Professor. Since we have some issues with time constraining, we are going to end these sessions with this last question. And the last question is, how often should we take breaks in between readings to make it more effective?
That again depends on the purpose for which you are reading. I think you have to decide, if you are a teacher or if you are a student, how much time. But I would suggest that, you know, you spend maybe 30 to 40 minutes reading something and take a break at that point, and then go back in your mind and think, what can I remember? Okay, don't sit there for hours and hours and hours. I ask my students to read, my low-level students to read for 20 minutes every day, something that they enjoy. okay? And then the intensive reading that I give them, they shouldn't spend more than an hour reading that. The important thing with vocabulary learning though is when you're learning new words, to come back and review them quite soon after you have first met them. So if you're trying to learn vocabulary from the readings that you're reading, look at those and then come back maybe half an hour or an hour later and review them, and then come back maybe 3 or 4 hours later. Space the time out. It's called spaced repetition. And the same thing with your readings. Read something, and when you've finished it, maybe come back a couple of hours later and just quickly look at it again, and then the next day review it again. Again, it depends on what you're reading, why you're reading it, and what you're going to do with that information and the assignments you have. It varies.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your marvelous words, Professor Cherry Brown. I think we all have learned something which are very informative and interesting. And I would like to thank all the participants, our dear students, for today's program's spontaneous participation. Now, I would humbly request to our Director of Green University Language Center, Ms. Raju Munira, to please provide her concluding speech for this webinar. Ms. Raju Munira, ma'am.
Okay, thank you, Sumaya. So I'd like to thank our distinguished keynote speaker, Professor Cherry Brown. Thank you so much for your unconditional support, so which you have provided. So whenever we called you, you respond. You always were very much positive towards us, and we have got tremendous support from you. Thank you very much. We are really privileged to have you among us. Actually, there is a proverb that the more you read, the more you learn, but it is always very challenging for the teachers to make the reading text interested to our students.
Yes.
So you have provided so many information. How can we make the text more interesting to our students? And our students have also received so many guidelines how they can read properly and they can read more. So thank you very much for your tremendous effective speech. We will be highly benefited, and definitely we will apply these tips and techniques whenever we are in the classroom. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.
So basically reading, as I have mentioned, we have 3 EAP courses, and reading is mandatory for each of the courses. So yes, it is very challenging to conduct reading courses. So basically we who are conducting these courses will be highly benefited. From the next semester, we will apply the tips which you have provided us. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you. Let me know how you get on.
Sure.
If you've got feedback or suggestions, if you try something and it works out in a different way, please let me know.
Sure. Already we have started to applying the stories in our classes.
Oh, wonderful!
So
I'd love to hear back from your students. Yes, thank you. I really would love feedback.
Students are doing their assignment.
Great.
Okay, so I'll let them know so that they can give their feedback, and they are submitting assignment from those stories.
Thank you. And please send it to me. I'd love to hear what they think of them.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your concluding
speech. Anyone please? So is there anyone who wants to share their experience? So is there a Russell?
Can I say something?
Are you there? Yes, please share. Yes, sure.
Okay, so earlier when Professor Brown started today's session, she had informed us that why it is important to know the background, the why, how, and other questions. Just before this webinar, I have concluded one of my classes, and I have some of my students are also present in this webinar, and I've just concluded my course saying these tips and they were very much enthusiastic that there are opening some dimensions inside their reading skills. And I think Professor Brown's session has more, in a bigger way, helped them in today's webinar.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, this is a privilege for us. We know the teachers of Bangladesh, every year, Professor Brown and her teammates visit Bangladesh to teach the English teachers. Okay, so and we are so privileged that she is teaching at this moment to our our students. So it is the rare opportunity for our students to get the session of Miss Cherry Brown. Basically, she's the trainer of the English teachers. So we are really thankful to you.
My privilege to be with you.
Next time in Bangladesh, whenever you visit, we will welcome you to visit our campus.
Thank you.
So,
I'd love to come. I've seen a few photos. It looks amazing.
We have the international conference at the end of this year. So in this year, you don't have any plan to visit Bangladesh, isn't it?
At the moment, if I leave Japan, they won't allow me back in. So I'm stuck here.
Okay, but I'll send you the formal invitation letter for our conference. This is the international conference. And in Japan, I think I have informed you, we have good communication with Japan from basically from Language Center. We are conducting Japanese language test.
Right.
And in Bangladesh, we are the only approved center in Bangladesh. So we have a very good relationship with Japan.
Great, that's great.
Yes, so
without
we are actually without the certificate of this test, no one can visit Japan. So in Bangladesh, we are the only approved venue who are conducting this test, and from our language center, basically, language center is organizing this.
Okay.
So as we have the good relationship with Japan, and if we have any opportunity to visit Japan, definitely we will visit you. So in which state are you staying?
The prefecture. It's a prefecture. I'm in Akita, A-K-I-T-A. It's up in the north of the main island of Honshu, the northwest.
Okay.
And it's a place that gets really cold in the winter. We get a lot of snow. So if you come, I strongly recommend that you don't come in February or January because it's really hard to move around. But other times of the year, it's fine.
As the Language Center team is organizing this exam, actually, we have the invitation from Japan to visit their venues. So that's why we have that type of plan that we, the team member of Language Center, will visit Japan, because for the last 5 and 6 years we are doing, we are conducting this exam.
I certainly hope that it will become possible again. At the moment, it's really difficult because the Japanese government has put restrictions in place.
Yes.
Yes. Even for people who have lived here for a long time, if they leave, they can't come back in. So at this point, I'm staying put.
Yes. Oh, I see. Yes. It's not possible at this moment, but we have a plan.
Great, great. We look forward to that day. I hope it comes soon.
So I think we can end the session at this moment. So thank you very much, Ms. Cherry Brown. It was a wonderful moment that we have the privilege to attend your session. So hope to get this type of session in the coming days. And we are also expecting that you will support us in this way. And this is actually unconditional support which you are providing. We are really thankful to you. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome. It's been lovely to spend this time with you. And thank you, dear students, for attending and being so patient and listening. I appreciate that you have taken part today. And I will say goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Goodbye, ma'am.
Take care, Professor.
Okay.
ম্যাম অ্যাটেন্ডেন্স নেবেন এখন?
So সুমাইয়া, হ্যাঁ অ্যাটেন্ডেন্স শিটটা আমি হচ্ছে এখন করছি। জাবির তোমার কাছে অ্যাটেন্ডেন্স শিটটা আছে না? জাবির আছো? আচ্ছা আমি দিচ্ছি অ্যাটেন্ডেন্স শিটটা। হ্যাঁ পেয়েছো তোমরা সবাই অ্যাটেন্ডেন্স শিট?
Yes, ma'am.
সুমাইয়া, হ্যাঁ সবাই হচ্ছে সাবমিট করবে, নাম এবং আইডি লিখে সাবমিট করবে। সুমাইয়া আমাদের লাস্ট পর্যন্ত কত ছিল পার্টিসিপেন্ট?
ম্যাম
Screenshot-
59
স্ক্রিনশট নেওয়া হয়েছিল?
আমি হ্যাঁ ম্যাম আমি যখন স্ক্রিনশট নিয়েছি তখন মনে হয় হাইয়েস্ট ছিল 65 অথবা 68 এরকম ছিল।
আচ্ছা ওদের অ্যাটেন্ডেন্সটা দেওয়া পর্যন্ত একটু ওয়েট করতে হবে, আদারওয়াইজ তো এটা হয়ে যাবে।
ম্যাম আমার 6টায় ক্লাস আছে, আমি তাহলে
হ্যাঁ ঠিক আছে, তুমি চল। তোমার কি অবস্থা এখন?
ম্যাম এখন বেটার, কালকে হঠাৎ করেই খুব বেশি খারাপ হয়ে গেছিল আর কি।
হ্যাঁ হচ্ছে খুব অসুস্থ হয়ে গেছিল, মনীষাও। আসলে কয়েকদিন আমাদের উপর আসলে অনেক লোড ছিল।
থ্যাংক ইউ, আসসালামু আলাইকুম।
ওকে, ওয়ালাইকুম আসসালাম। যাদের সাইন করা যারা সাবমিট করেছো তারা লিভ করতে পারো। হ্যাঁ
ম্যাম সাবমিট করেছে তাহলে কি লিভ নিব?
হ্যাঁ যারা সাবমিট করেছো তারা লিভ নিতে পারো।
আরেকবার একটু লিংকটা দিবেন। আরেকবার একটু লিংকটা দিবেন।
রেকর্ডটা কি পাওয়া যাবে? রেকর্ডিংটা কি আপলোড করা হবে?
হ্যাঁ রেকর্ডিংটা গুগল ক্লাসরুমে আপলোড করা হবে। সুমা তোমার কাছে তো রেকর্ডিংটা আছে তাই না?
ইয়েস ম্যাম আমার কাছে আছে।
লেফট নিয়ে চলে যাও ম্যাম।
হ্যাঁ যারা সাবমিট করেছো তারা লিভ নিতে পারো। হ্যাঁ আপনি কি বলছিল?
হ্যালো
হ্যালো, হ্যাঁ বলো। হ্যালো বলো। হ্যালো
এই বিষয়ে কিছু লিখে সাবমিট করব।
কি বলছো বুঝতে পারছি না, আবার
হ্যালো
বলো।
ম্যাম আমরা জাস্ট মিস কি মানে এটা
ম্যাম সিটি ওয়ান যে
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ
ম্যাম ওরা সিটি ওয়ান যারা দেয়নি ওরা কি কোনো
এটার উপর অ্যাসাইনমেন্ট হবে,
কোশ্চেন লিখে অ্যানসার দিবে সেটা আর কি জিজ্ঞেস করতেছে।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ এই যে এই সেশনের উপর আমি রেকর্ডিংটা বলো। হ্যাঁ এই সেশনের উপরই বলেছি
ম্যাম আপনি ক্লাসে বলে দিয়েছিলেন যে যারা দেয়নি তারা যেন পাঁচটা মানে সেন্টেন্স লিখে সাবমিট করে।
রাইট,
এটা কাজ করছে।
তোমরা আগে সাবমিট করবে তারপর আমি রেকর্ডিংটা শেয়ার করব। তুমি কতটা অ্যাটেন্টিভলি শুনেছো আই হ্যাভ টু আইডেন্টিফাই। এক্সামের আগে আমি হচ্ছে সাবমিট করে দিব যাতে তুমি হচ্ছে, আমি যেটা বলেছি এক্সামে কিছু কোশ্চেন থাকবে এখান থেকে। ওকে সবার হয়েছে? সাইন করো।
ম্যাম
then we can leave.
রেকর্ডটা একটু
হ্যাঁ বলো।
ওকে ম্যাম।
সুমাইয়া আমরা কি লিভ করব?
শিওর ম্যাম।
সাবমিট করতে হবে?
হ্যাঁ না বলেছি অ্যাটেন্ডেন্সটা এখন সাবমিট করো।
হ্যাঁ এটা করেছিলাম, মানে যারা মানে সিটি ওয়ান মিস করেছে তাদের কি মানে এই মানে 8টা সেমিনার পড়তে মানে যা বুঝতে পারছে তার 5টা মানে 5টা সেন্টেন্স আর কি এসে সাবমিট করব।
হ্যাঁ রাইট রাইট।
ম্যাম তাহলে কি ক্লোজ করে দিব?
ঠিক আছে ম্যাম, তাহলে আমরা লিভ নিই এখন। আসসালামু আলাইকুম।
হ্যাঁ ঠিক আছে, যাদের হয়ে গেছে তারা লিভ নাও। হ্যাঁ এখন তো সবারই হয়ে গেছে, আমার মনে হয় এখন আমরা লিভ নিতে পারি না।
ইয়েস ম্যাম। ঠিক আছে ম্যাম তাহলে এন্ড করে দিচ্ছি।
ওকে, থ্যাংক ইউ সো মাচ সুমাইয়া, তুমি অনেক সাপোর্ট
Okay, you're welcome, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Okay, ma'am. Assalamu alaikum.